Okay, we're continuing with the book Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers, alphabetical order. Here's O. Henry. He lived from 1862 to 1910. He was an American writer of short stories. His real name was William Porter. O. Henry was his pen name. Ayn Rand liked him, said he was sort of fun and upbeat. He had a good attitude, personal philosophy. Just have a few real brief quotes from him, if I can get myself out of the way here. He said, I'll give you the whole secret of short story writing. Here it is. Rule number 1, write stories that please yourself. There is no rule number 2. And that's a decent thing in the sense, there's a lot of quotes like that. Frost, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. Something, if you're going to make an audience laugh, you should probably think the joke is funny yourself. So that works. Basically, the big secret of writing, I said it before, is just write like you're talking to an intelligent friend. The same stuff that would make your smart friends laugh is how you should write. Okay, and then you say, well, what about writing for stupid people? No, don't waste your time. Don't ever write for stupid people. Stupid people don't read, so they're irrelevant. Okay, next, Aristotle Onassis. He lived from 1900 to 1975. A Greek and Argentinian businessman, rich guy. He had a long-term love affair with the great opera singer Maria Callas. Okay. O Mio Babino Caro by Maria Callas is one of my favorite songs ever. It's just magnificent. He later married Jacqueline Kennedy, the widow of JFK. So here's his first quote. To be successful, you must act big, think big, and talk big. He talked about how you maintain your reputation, your image. The secret of business is to know something that nobody else knows. You are not truly wealthy until you can earn money while you are sleeping. I think that's a good quote, is that in a perfect world, you don't want to make money just being paid for what you do. You probably never become that wealthy. What you want to do is make money when you don't have to be there, have like a turnkey business. That's what all the great business people said, So like I screwed up on money. I should, because I had a wealthy father and I just took it for granted. I'm smarter than my dad. I'm going to be rich. I don't have to think about it. But doctors got paid like 3 times as much, back in the 1980s as they get paid now. So, don't get me wrong. It could be a lot worse. But anyways, you got to be careful. In the old days, you're married for life, one house, one spouse. That makes you rich. But when you get these modern women that want a divorce and you keep moving to new houses, that gets very expensive. Okay, next is Walter Ong. Walter Ong is an American Jesuit priest who was a religious historian, and he studied orality as a culture transforms from being primarily oral to having more written language. Okay, and so he says, in an oral culture, knowledge once acquired had to be constantly repeated or it would be lost. So fixed formulaic thought patterns were essential for wisdom and effective administration. So that's things like the Iliad and the Odyssey. A lot of that was passed on orally through Homer, and of course it got written down eventually. He says, learners are doers, not recipients. Yeah, they have to participate. But that's also why you have a lot of the repetitive speech patterns in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Each character will have an epithet, Dawn and her rosy fingers, things like that. Okay, Walter Ong's next quote, he says, without writing, the literate mind would not and could not think as it does, not only when engaged in writing, but normally, even when in composing its thoughts in oral form. More than any other single invention, writing has transformed human consciousness. And as Schopenhauer says, any smart person spends a lot of time reading because that's where the information is. You can nowadays get a lot of information from YouTube videos and stuff, but you still got to write it down and keep track so you have a log of, what you've learned in one particular field or something. I like these quote books. So quote books are about as high yield as it gets. They're great for the bathroom. And then you want to have your own set of quotes that you'll use someday yourself if you do writing or make YouTube videos or whatever else you do. It's just a useful way to save information. The way I remember a writer and a philosopher or historical events is a few quotes about the person. Okay, Walter Ong. There is no way to write unless you read and read a lot. Yeah. Basically, the average person is forced to read a couple things freshman year of high school. They hate it and they never read again another book the rest of their whole life. Whereas people who keep reading, they developed a much, much, much more sophisticated vocabulary and ability to write themselves. In my experience, it's very rare in regular life to meet a person who knows how to write well. Really rare. Okay, because I've had to read tons and tons of letters and stuff of people. And of course, I've read tons and tons of books. And it's uncommon to come across somebody who writes well. Okay. like I met this one nurse, and she's a little bit kind of stuck up and a little bit of a pain in the butt. And she was a nursing supervisor, and the other nurses said she was real smart, and I just thought she was kind of a bitchy, stupid nurse. But then I one time saw what she wrote, and I'm like, wow, she's pretty smart, because she was quite articulate when I saw one letter she wrote. But anyways, okay, J. Robert Oppenheimer, he lived from 1904 to 1967. So anyways, that was her distinguishing characteristic. She could write well, and that was why she became, a head honcho nursing supervisor. So even though in person she kind of seemed kind of like a dull, bitchy nurse, she was actually pretty smart. Okay, J. Robert Oppenheimer, he said, American theoretical physicist who was director of the Manhattan Project, he said, there must be no barriers for freedom of inquiry. There is no place for dogma in science. The scientist is free and must be free to ask any question, to doubt any assertion, to seek for any evidence, to correct any errors. The only way to avoid error is to detect it, and the only way to detect it is to be free to inquire. And we know that as long as men are free to ask what they must, free to say what they think, free to think what they will, freedom can never be lost, and science can never regress. Yeah, free speech is very important. All these, so-called HATE speech laws are very bad because what they're trying to do is stifle free speech. And basically, they're going to make it into, hate you-know-what speech, anything that promotes freedom. That's what's coming. Okay, you're going to end up like 1984, George Orwell, the Ministry of Truth specialized in telling lies, all right? Okay, let's see. Next quote from J. Robert Oppenheimer. Pragmatism is intellectually safe, but ultimately a sterile philosophy. And that's kind of like the typical, research professor. They just answer micro questions. Because you answer a micro question, you'll get your funding, you'll have something to do, but you'll never achieve any interesting discoveries. But you'll keep the lights on, so it's worth it in that sense. And then one other scientist said, the average scientist is a bricklayer, not an architect. The great ones are the architects. Okay, the history of science is rich with examples of fruitfulness from bringing two sets of techniques together, two sets of ideas developed in separate contexts for the pursuit of a new truth, in touch with one another. Yeah, I would agree with that. A lot of times the person who's going to make big advances, big discoveries in a medical field, a health field, is somebody who comes to it with a background from another area. And I think I actually kind of do that for a lot of health stuff. So that's why I can understand stuff. Even though you got guys who've been doing it for 50 years, they're only looking at it one way. And as a matter of fact, I'm studying some really interesting brain biochemistry. That's kind of why my videos, I haven't done anything too exciting with my videos lately, because I've been studying so much, some complex brain biochemistry, and I think I figured it out. I'll let you know soon. Anyways, I think that's all I got for today on these quotes. Oops. No, I don't. Yeah, that's all I got. I hope you found that interesting.